Frederick II of House Hohenzollern, better known as Frederick the Great, was King of Prussia from 1740 to 1786, and one of the most influential figures in early modern European history. During his reign, he would transform Prussia from a poor and fragmented kingdom into a major European power, establishing it as the dominant German state, and laying the early foundations for its pivotal role in the unification of Germany. Known for his brilliant military tactics, Frederick faced off against Europe's great powers, Austria, Russia, and France, and emerged victorious time and time again. But Frederick was more than just a military leader. As a champion of the European Enlightenment, Frederick would use his absolute rule to pursue ideals of reason, science, and culture, implementing sweeping reforms that would leave a lasting impact on his nation and its future. But who was the man behind this larger-than-life persona, and what people and events would shape the story of his life? Hey everyone, this is Pot's History. Join us as we dive into the life and legacy of one of history's most captivating leaders, Frederick the Great. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this history documentary. The child that would one day become Frederick the Great was born on the 24th of January 1712 at the Berlin Palace, Prussia, in modern-day Germany. At the time, Germany was not yet the single unified nation we think of today. Instead, it was a patchwork of hundreds of minor Germanic states, constantly vying for control and influence in the region. The Kingdom of Prussia was one of these states, and its survival and prosperity was central to the ambitions of Frederick's family. His parents were Sophia Dorothea of Hanover, a relative of the British monarchy, and Frederick William I, who was king in Prussia before him. The eldest son of 10 surviving siblings, young Frederick was named Crown Prince and heir to the throne. In his early youth, Frederick was raised close to his mother and his older sister, Wilhelmine. The pair were tutored together at the Berlin Palace and would develop a close bond and lifelong friendship. During these early years, Frederick would begin to develop a deep and enduring passion for music, literature, and French culture. However, this was to the strong disapproval of his strictly Calvinist father, King Frederick William I, who had other plans for his son and heir. Frederick William I, often dubbed the Soldier King, was a strict and militaristic ruler who governed Prussia with absolute authority. He had a lifelong obsession with Prussia's army, developing it into a large, well-trained war machine. During his reign, the Prussian army doubled in size, from 38,000 to a staggering 83,000 troops, and their discipline and firepower was arguably the best in Europe. Frederick William would carry over this disciplined attitude to the raising of his children. He enforced a strict and often extreme education focused on discipline and military training. As young as the age of 6, Frederick would begin to spend increasing amounts of time with his father, studying the fundamentals of war and statecraft. Here, he was at the mercy of his father's violent rage. He was bullied, socially isolated, publicly humiliated, and brutally beaten. This abuse was frequent and targeted Frederick's interest in art and French culture, which his father considered to be effeminate, womanly, and disgraceful. It was an incredibly harsh and controlling upbringing. Even the slightest disobedience could warrant severe punishment. Young Frederick would be forced to pursue his artistic and intellectual pursuits in secret, his resentment and disdain for his tyrannical father growing year after year. By 1730, Frederick was now 18 years old and serving as a Prussian army officer. Even after all these years, his father's abuse had only gone worse. Frederick was at a breaking point. He plotted to escape Prussia and seek refuge in Great Britain, and he wouldn't be going alone. He was assisted by Hans Hermann von Katte, a fellow army officer who had become a trusted friend and confidant of Frederick. It was even rumored that the two had become intimately involved, a notion that provoked immense rage and disgust from his father. While the royal retinue was on tour, Frederick, Hans, and other junior officers would make their secretive escape. They wouldn't get very far. On the eve of their departure, one of the conspirators would lose his nerve and expose the plot to Frederick's father. The king was furious, appalled by his son's attempted desertion and rumors of Frederick's intimate relations. Frederick and Hans were promptly arrested and brought back to the fortress of Küstrin in Prussia. In a fit of rage, the king charged the pair with treason, a crime punishable by execution. On November 6, 1730, on the king's orders, Frederick was forced to watch from a window as his close friend, Hans von Katte, was executed by beheading. Frederick was spared, though he was deeply devastated by the loss of his close friend. Stripped of his military titles, he was forced by his father to remain in Küstrin, under close surveillance, where he endured more rigorous schooling in state administration. It would be 2 years before his father permitted his release, but only under one condition. On June 12, 1733, Frederick would marry Elizabeth Christine, a relative of the powerful Austrian Habsburgs. The marriage was arranged by his father, under political influence from Austria. Frederick was less than pleased. He wrote to his sister Wilhelmine about his bride-to-be, "There can be neither love nor friendship between us," and he even threatened suicide. Nonetheless, the couple was wed, and tensions began to ease between father and son. Frederick was reinstated in the army with the rank of colonel, and in 1734, his father would gift him the Rheinsberg Palace. Here, Frederick was in his element. He was free to fill the halls of the Rheinsberg with musicians, actors, artists, and friends. He would spend the next 4 years to fully indulge in reading, composing music, studying philosophy, and discussing warfare. He regarded these as some of the best years of his life. All this would come to an abrupt end, however. In 1740, Frederick's father died of heart failure. Not long after, at the age of 28, Frederick would ascend the throne of Prussia and be named king. On May 31st, 1740, Frederick ascended the throne of the Kingdom of Prussia. He would reconcile with his father before his death, acknowledging his terrible treatment and abuse, but also recognizing his father's lifelong effort towards the administration and militarization of the Prussian state. Indeed, Frederick's father had left him quite the inheritance. A large and well-funded army of 83,000 was now at his command. The backbone of the army was the infantry, about 60,000 strong, consisting of well-drilled blocks of the finest musketmen in Europe. They were supported by 10,000 cavalry and a host of artillerymen and supporting units. Frederick's father had left Prussia in a state of unprecedented militarization. Up to 86% of the state's budget was spent on the military. The situation is best described by French philosopher Voltaire's famous quote, "Where some states have an army, the Prussian army has a state." However, for all its military strength, Prussia was still a small, disconnected, and economically weak country compared to the established European great powers. Moreover, their nearby rivals, the Austrian Habsburgs dynasty, held significant regional power and influence as Holy Roman emperors. Unlike his father, who was notably frugal and prudent with the use of his army, Frederick would put Prussia on the offensive. His first move would be to conquer the nearby Austrian territory of Silesia. Silesia was highly developed, economically rich, and would connect Prussia to navigable rivers and a large, productive population pool. It was a perfect opportunity for Frederick to expand his power at the expense of his Germanic rivals. But Frederick needed a casus belli, a good cause to justify invading Austrian territory. Coincidentally, a 23-year-old Maria Theresia had recently ascended the Austrian throne, inheriting the vast domains of the Habsburg dynasty. Frederick disputed her claim, arguing that as a woman, Maria had no legitimate right on the Austrian lands, and he sought to claim Silesia for himself. On the 16th of December, 1740, a mere 2 months after becoming king, Frederick would invade Silesia, sparking the War of Austrian Succession and a bitter rivalry with Austria's young monarch, Maria Theresia. On December 16th, 1740, Frederick and his men began the invasion of Silesia, crossing into the territory quietly and without a formal declaration of war. The small Austrian garrison in Silesia offered little resistance against Frederick's invading force, and the Prussians quickly swept through the region. Within 7 weeks, almost all of Silesia was under Prussian control. But suddenly, Frederick was caught off guard by the arrival of an Austrian army, and on April 10th, the two sides would clash near the town of Mollwitz. The Battle of Mollwitz would be Frederick's first battle at command. The Prussian army of 22,000 outnumbered the Austrians' 19,000 troops, but their enemy held a large cavalry advantage. Frederick would strike first, using his field guns to bombard the Austrian line as his elite infantry advanced. Suddenly, without order, the Austrian cavalry charged against the Prussians' right flank, shattering the unprepared Prussian cavalry. Frederick found himself in the midst of the chaos, and though he fought bravely, the situation grew dire. Defeat seemed imminent. His generals urged him to flee to avoid capture. Frederick and the Prussian cavalry would retreat from the battle, leaving the infantry to fend for itself, under the command of a veteran Prussian general. In this moment of chaos, the Prussian infantry would show their unrivaled discipline and firepower. They stood firm, firing volley after volley into the Austrian cavalry and forcing their retreat. Next, they would strip the dead of ammunition and advance toward the Austrian line. They would employ an oblique order attack, focusing the bulk of their forces on the Austrian left flank with the aim of overwhelming it. In moments like this, the Prussian infantry seemed invincible. Their skill and quality allowed them to fire at 3 times the rate of any European army of the day, and their superb drilling kept them tightly coordinated and maneuverable as they pressed the attack. The Austrian infantry was severely outmatched, and as their left flank began to crumble, the rest of the army would rout. Despite the initial setback, the Prussians had seized the day. Though the Prussian army emerged victorious, Frederick felt humiliated for leaving the battlefield prematurely. It was his first battle, however, and he viewed Mollwitz as a valuable learning experience. Determined to address his army's weaknesses, he immediately set to work on overhauling his underperforming cavalry, subjugating them to intense drilling and reorganization. Most importantly, Frederick would never again abandon his men on the battlefield. The victory at Mollwitz sent shockwaves through Europe. Prussia had secured an early victory over their powerful rival Austria, tightened their grip on Silesia, and showcased the unrivaled strength of their elite infantry. They had gained significant prestige and valuable battle experience, but the war was far from over. Inspired by Mollwitz, France and Bavaria would join the war against Austria, citing their own grievances with the Habsburg succession. In November 1741, the French-Bavarian force would seize Prague, forcing the Austrians to abandon the front in Silesia and march west to recapture it. Frederick pursued them and cut off the Austrian force, leading to the decisive confrontation at the Battle of Chotusitz. 25,000 Prussians faced an Austrian force of similar size. Frederick's retrained cavalry proved far more effective, delivering a devastating charge early in the battle. And once again, Prussia's elite infantry held their ground and emerged victorious. With that, the Austrians were forced to sue for peace. The Treaty of Breslau, negotiated in June 1742, granted Prussia almost all of Silesia. Following the Treaty of Breslau and the formal acquisition of Silesia, Frederick and his Prussian army would enjoy 2 years of relative peace. But with the Bavarians and French now withdrawing from the war, Frederick grew suspicious of potential retaliation from Maria Theresia. Recognizing that she would never relinquish Silesia so easily, Frederick decided to take the initiative with a bold, preemptive attack. He marched his army straight to Prague, capturing the city on the 16th of September 1744 after a relentless 3-day bombardment. This time around, Austria's German ally Saxony would join the war. Their combined forces outnumbered Frederick's. Despite the numerical advantage, the combined army refused to directly engage with the Prussians, so Frederick would withdraw back to Silesia to wait out the winter. He would remain there until the following summer, waiting for the right moment to strike. The Prussians would allow the overconfident enemy to cross the Sudetys Mountains in Silesia unopposed. Once across, Frederick planned to pin them down and force a decisive battle. Frederick and the Prussians seized their opportunity in the early morning hours of June 4th, 1745. Prussian scouts had discovered the Austro-Saxon force, 62,000 strong, camped outside the town of Hohenfriedberg, resting and unaware. Frederick's plan was to launch a surprise attack with his similarly sized force, swiftly neutralizing the Saxons before turning his full attention to the Austrian army. The Battle of Hohenfriedberg would begin on the morning of June 4th, 1745. Prussian troops began crossing the Striegau River to launch their attack. Due to limited bridges and crossings, the Prussians struggled to get their forces across quickly. Nonetheless, the first troops were able to cross and began clashing with Saxon forces occupying 2 hills just outside their camp. These skirmishes alerted the Austro-Saxon camp, and the Prussians had to act quickly to capitalize on their advantage. In a daring move, a group of Prussian cavalry circumnavigated the hills and charged straight for the Saxon camp, inflicting a devastating blow on the poorly prepared cavalry. Soon after, Prussian infantry stormed the Saxon camp as well, overwhelming the disorganized force. The surprise attack was a great success, and the Saxon line was decisively routed. The Prussians, still crossing the river, and the now deployed Austrian forces moved to the front, engaging in brutal, close-range combat as their lines converged. The last of the Prussian cavalry, still on the far side of the river, crossed just in time to land another devastating charge, striking the Austrian cavalry on the right flank. Meanwhile, in the center of the battlefield, massive blocks of infantry clashed fiercely, exchanging volley after volley of musket fire. At this critical moment, the Bayreuth Dragoons, an elite Prussian cavalry unit, galloped fiercely into the fray and charged through a gap in the center of the Austrian line. Their attack shattered the Austrian formation, breaking all cohesion within the enemy army. With their forces crumbling and their allies abandoning them, thousands of Austrians, including commanders, surrendered the field. Frederick and the Prussians had yet again secured a decisive victory in brilliant fashion. The Battle of Hohenfriedberg was one of Frederick's most admired victories, and his army sought to capitalize on the momentum. They defeated an Austro-Saxon counterattack at the Battle of Suhr on June 4th, 1745, and again at the Battle of Kesseldorf on December 15th, just outside the Saxon capital of Dresden. This final victory forced the enemy to capitulate with the Treaty of Dresden on Christmas Day, 1745. The treaty ended the war and once again confirmed Prussia's control of Silesia. After 5 years of war, Frederick, now 33, emerged victorious, and many began referring to him by the title of the Great. His triumph infuriated Maria Theresia, and his success began to attract the attention of other European powers, notably France, Russia, and King George III of England. All eyes were now on Prussia. For the moment, Frederick returned to Berlin, where he had much to handle, from family matters to the consolidation of his newly acquired territory. He needed to be prepared. His next challenge would be his most difficult yet, a global war, the likes of which the world had not yet seen.